Okay, we're going to start today our second kind of broad topic, um, and we're going to deal with at least one cultural issue. Probably not more than that. The truth is, dealing with cultural issues related to the family is just enormous. You can imagine thinking about all of the different ethnic groups that we could deal with, all of the different types of culture that we could possibly come up with. And we have another class that deals with that a little bit, and we deal with it some in clinical supervision. So we're not going to try here to cover all the different possible cultural things that families could have to deal with. What we're going to do here is try to just look at one that affects people from all races, all ethnic groups. And so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the question of poverty and how poverty affects families, and maybe how we should try to figure out how to deal with that a little bit. So I know that all of you are familiar with the idea of poverty, of course. Some of you may have been very poor. There are some of you who think you're really poor right now, I'm sure. Some of you may have really lived through poverty. Some of you may have grown up in poverty. We're going to talk about what that means to kind of live in generational poverty in a minute. But whether you've been in it or not, we're all familiar with it. The closer you are to it, the more important this stuff may be. One of my broad goals here is that we, in our program, that we kind of produce therapists who are at least sensitive enough to this issue that we try to figure out ways to provide ministry, either in the form of family ministry through the church or in the form of counseling ministry to people who can't afford it and who have very little financial resources. The second broad idea is that we understand when someone comes to see us for help, whether it's in a counseling office or in church. When someone comes to see us for help, that we understand how poverty has affected them. Because poverty doesn't just mean you don't have very much money. It affects the way you think. It affects the decisions that you make, of course. It affects your value system. It changes lots of things. And so if you're a therapist or a minister to people who live in poverty, you have to understand something about how that affects them and how that affects family structure and all those sorts of things. So we're going to spend some time on that. It's also very important to me because it's a thing that I have been, over the years, very convicted about, and I've spent a lot of time on. Some of you know I've been involved with a little church here called The Mission for about 15 years or so. I served on the board of Love and Care Ministries, which is a ministry of poor and homeless people here, for a while. And I've been involved in leading worship and being an elder at the Mission, and a church that's mostly for poor, and we still have a lot of homeless people there. And so I've grown to love those folks, to be involved with them, to really appreciate what you get, not what you give. I feel like I get so much more than I give at the Mission. So what I get, though, is this incredible sense of love and acceptance. It's interesting. When I was used to go to a large, very prominent, very wealthy church, and led worship there, played in a band there, and every week we would have people who came and would at least critique us, if not complain, about things related to worship or related to music. Something was too loud, or we did too many fast songs, or we did too many slow songs, or something. There was always something that somebody was dissatisfied with. And I've been playing at the Mission now for about 15 years, and one of the maybe 12 years. One of the things that's interesting is those people are just thankful to have somebody there. We can our band can have this great Sunday where we hit every note, we play everything perfectly, and people just love us, and they just say, "Oh, how wonderful it is to have your music," And we can also have a Sunday where everything just is like a huge train wreck, and those same people will still come up to me after church and say, "Oh, the music was wonderful. Thank you so much." It's just this incredible acceptance and love and tolerance for imperfection that I really learned being in a place like the Mission. And I really learned that people there can really love you and show you something that the rest of us that kind of live in a much more privileged situation, I don't know that we even have the ability to show that and to give that to people. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. Let's talk. Okay, sorry we had a little bit of a break there. So we're going to continue talking about poverty. First thing I want us to look at is to maybe start here with this scripture, which I think is a good scripture when you're thinking about dealing with poor people. From Luke 4. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because He's anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind and release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." You know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Scripture is full of places and situations where the poor are lifted up. The poor are considered to be a priority for the church. There's from Isaiah through the New Testament, there are just all these admonitions for us to take care of the poor. And there are places, of course, within the church and within our ministries that we do that really well, and there are places where we don't do it well at all. If any group of people are compassionate and caring and concerned about the poor, I think it ought to be those of us who deal with family ministry and deal with family therapy and psychology. We ought to be that sensitive group of folks who can really pay attention to what's going on with poor people. So I hope that you will buy into that, and I hope that this will be a time when we can kind of talk about how that might be something that's really good for us and good for us to think about. I love the story of St. Lawrence the Deacon. I don't know if you know this or not, but it's kind of a legend. St. Lawrence was a church leader who was martyred at some point. He's kind of famous for being burned on a barbecue grill, and the old legend is that at one point he said, "Turn me over, I'm done on one side." So that's kind of gruesome, but it's kind of one of the legends of St. Lawrence. But another one is that St. Lawrence was a treasurer for the church, and at some point the government came in and said, we're going to take over, and so what we'd like to do is we want you, because you're the treasurer, to gather up all of the treasure of the church and bring it to us, and we are going to confiscate it and use it, and we'll give you 3 days or whatever it was to gather up the treasure of the church and bring it and present it to us. So what Lawrence did was, he was the treasurer, so he took all the money, all the riches, all of the different things that the church had, and he gathered them all together, and he went out into the countryside and he gave it all away. Gave it to all the poorest, most destitute, most needy people he could find. He gave everything away, every penny. And then he invited all of the poor to come to this government, like a meeting room, a great hall, to come to this, stand in this plaza on the day he was supposed to present the money. And so when he went before the proconsul or the mayor, the governor, and they said, "Okay, your time is up. where's the treasure of the church? And the legend is that Lawrence turned around and walked back and threw open the doors, and there were thousands of poor standing out in the plaza. And he turned and looked at the governor and said, "Behold the treasure of the church. The poor are the treasure of the church." I think that's, whether it's true or not, and who knows. It's a beautiful story, and I think it has a good message for us that if we ignore those people in favor of people like me, for example, if we're more prone to want to sit next to a college professor or an attorney or a teacher, and we ignore that homeless guy, we ignore the smelly person, we ignore the person who smells like alcohol, we ignore the person who smells like they've been smoking dope that morning, we ignore or we discount the people who can't dress well, or who don't know how to behave. One of the things that we deal with in the mission all the time is people who haven't been in church. They don't know how to behave. They don't know how to act. And if we can't tolerate that, then we're going to miss what at least St. Lawrence believed was the treasure of the church, which may be the poor. So I think it's important that we think about them. Another one of my favorite references to dealing with people in poverty comes from one of my favorite theologians, and that's Bono. So I'm going to stop right here, and we'll come back to Bono and start a new video.